John and Eleanor Peterson were, by all accounts, perfect retirees in training. They were the model of American thrift. They never had a car payment past 48 months. They clipped coupons like it was an Olympic sport, saving every dime they could. They paid off their mortgage in 2003 and had avoided credit card debt for decades. They did everything their parents told them to do. They followed every single piece of old money advice to the letter. And yet, sitting across from me in my office, their perfectly organized, three-ring binder resting on a mahogany table like a tombstone, John was 66 years old and realizing, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that he was utterly and completely broke. The worst part? He never saw it coming, because he was too busy counting pennies to notice the dollars sprinting out the back door. The story of John and Eleanor is a cautionary tale. Folks, one I need every single one of you watching, especially those of you near retirement, to hear. It's the story of how focusing too much on the defensive small moves can blind you to the offensive big wins, turning a lifetime of hard work into a devastating short-circuit retirement. Meet John and Eleanor. They weren't from Silicon Valley or Wall Street. They were from the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Cincinnati, Ohio. John spent 32 years working in logistics for a regional plumbing supply company, a job he kept meticulously, never late, never complaining. Eleanor taught third grade for 28 years before taking an early retirement package when the school board offered a decent payout. They were salt-of-the-earth people, and they had a retirement dream built on simple, clear arithmetic. If they lived like they did now, frugally, carefully, responsibly, they would be fine. Their life philosophy could be summed up in Eleanor's favorite phrase, which she delivered with the authority of a financial guru. If you don't spend it, you can't lose it. Eleanor was a general in the family's relentless war on spending. She used to drive an extra 3 miles out of her way just to save 4 cents on a gallon of gas, rationalizing the time and extra mileage as a worthwhile contribution to the family solvency. I remember when they first came to me, about 5 years before this meeting. I asked them about their discretionary spending. Discretionary? Eleanor scoffed, her silver hair pulled back in a tidy bun, her gaze sharp and challenging. We don't believe in that word, Grandpa. It implies a luxury of choice. We choose not to spend, ever, on anything we can live without. John chimed in, a proud, soft chuckle escaping him, smoothing the wrinkles in his perfectly pressed plaid shirt. We're a zero-based spending household. Son, everything has a purpose. We bring lunch to work in Tupperware containers. We haven't had a cable subscription since 2005. We use a library for DVDs. And those fancy coffee shops? A $5 latte? That's highway robbery. We make it at home, and Eleanor grinds the beans herself. Bless her heart. They were defensive superstars. They had mastered the art of the small save. Their fixed expenses were low. The house was paid off. Their old Honda CR-V was reliable, if a bit scratched up, and their grocery bill was a precise study in cost minimization, utilizing every store brand and every 2-for-1 deal. We got $400,000 saved up in our accounts, Grandpa, John said, puffing out his chest a little, radiating confidence. Plus Eleanor's small pension, and both our Social Security checks will kick in soon. We should be golden. I looked at the portfolio breakdown they handed me, and my heart sank a little, the way it always does when I see this particular financial configuration. It's a tragedy I've seen play out countless times in my 30 years. The breakdown of the $400,000. $250,000 was locked away in certificates of deposit or CDs, laddered to mature every 18 months, earning an average of 1.5% interest. It was safe. It was fixed. It was also barely moving. $100,000 was sitting idly in a standard low-yield savings account, earning a miserable 0.1%, or less than a penny on the dollar per year. $50. 000 was a mix of John's old 401k and Eleanor's IRA, all invested in a conservative, bond-heavy fund that hadn't even kept pace with the historical rate of inflation over the last decade. They were immensely proud of this $400,000. It felt tangible. It felt safe. Every dollar was a dollar they had saved, protected, and kept away from the chaos and volatility of the financial markets. But safety, like everything else in finance, is relative and often illusory. I remember telling them, with all the care in my voice I could muster, that their savings plan was a fantastic defensive strategy that lacked any offensive power. "John, Eleanor," I said, leaning forward and lowering my voice, "you've been playing the whole game in your own end zone. You've kept the ball out of the hands of the opponent, which is inflation and fees, and that is good. But you haven't moved the ball down the field. You haven't allowed your money to score a single point for your future selves." I tried to talk to them about inflation. I showed them charts, graphs, and projections. I explained that while they were earning 1.5% on their $250,000 in CDs, the cost of everything else, from milk to medical care, was chewing up 3% to 4% of their purchasing power every single year. Their money was shrinking in real terms, guaranteed. I showed them the power of their tax-advantaged 401k and IRA, how a little more risk, a little more exposure to diversified equity markets through a low-cost index fund could have turned that initial $400,000 into $600,000 or even $700,000 over the last decade they had worked. They had the time horizon for it, even starting in their mid-50s. But they were utterly paralyzed by an ingrained fear. "Grandpa, you remember 2008? John asked, his voice suddenly sharp, carrying the weight of ancient trauma. "My neighbor, Ted from accounting? He lost half his nest egg in that collapse. The market is a casino. We are not gamblers. We are savers. We will not lose what we earn through hard labor." This was the core of their invisible script, the broken rule they had inherited. They had been taught that saving was investing, and that the stock market was inherently greedy and risky, the very kind of paralyzing, scarcity-based thinking that keeps honest, hard-working people small. I tried to appeal to the great minds of finance, hoping wisdom could penetrate the wall of fear. "John, you're missing the forest for the trees." Warren Buffett once said, and this is crucial, risk comes from not knowing what you are doing. And when you intentionally let inflation eat your principal, that's not being safe. That is a guaranteed loss year after year. Investing in a broad, diversified index fund is not gambling. It's buying a small piece of American ingenuity and letting the greatest economy in the world work for you. Eleanor just nodded politely, gathered her binder, and told me they would stick with their current plan. "We'll keep making our own coffee, Grandpa," she said with a bright, misguided, but deeply sincere smile. "We'll be just fine. We always have been." Fast forward 5 years. John is 66. He has filed for his Social Security at full retirement age. At least they got that right, bless their hearts. And Eleanor is a few months away from her 65th birthday, which meant one thing: the complicated, often terrifying Medicare decision. This time, the atmosphere in my office was drastically different. The binder was still resting on the table, but Eleanor's hand was resting on it too, her knuckles white. John was fidgeting with a crumpled Kleenex, his usual confidence completely absent. "Grandpa," John started, his voice a low, gravelly growl of anxiety, "I need you to look at this Social Security number again. Are you absolutely sure that's all we're getting? I thought it would be more." I looked at the statement, which was correct down to the penny. "Yes, John. You filed at 66. Eleanor is filing for her spousal benefit at 65. The numbers are accurate. Between your check, Eleanor's spousal benefit, and her small teacher's pension, you're looking at about $4,200 a month in guaranteed income." "$4,200 a month," he repeated. But now it sounded less like a statement of fact and more like a crushing verdict. That was plenty. Our budget from 5 years ago calculated that was $50,400 a year. We only spend $40,000. We had a $10,000 cushion. That was the budget you made 5 years ago, John. I reminded him gently. A lot has changed. And here is where the defensive strategy, the hyper-focus on penny pinching, completely crumbled. They had been so focused on saving $5 here and $10 there. They had failed to look up and notice the two biggest offensive costs that had absolutely ballooned in the last 5 years: inflation and healthcare. Let's look at your actual spending from last year, I said, pulling up their updated bank statement analysis. Their property taxes on their paid-off home, which they viewed as their unassailable, non-depreciating asset, had jumped 22% due to rising local school levies and valuation reassessments. Their homeowners' insurance had risen 35% thanks to rising replacement costs and increased climate risk in their region. The $4,200 per month in fixed income they received now felt like $3,500 per month in today's buying power. Their $10,000 annual cushion was gone, replaced by a desperate year-round anxiety. The $50,400 they earned was now being swallowed whole by necessities that used to cost $40,000, and they were drawing down principal just to pay the water bill. The folly of the latte. I decided to calculate the total lifetime cost of Eleanor's obsession. I calculated the total savings from Eleanor's lifetime war on the daily latte. Assuming they each saved $5 a day, 5 days a week, for 30 years, that's about $78,000 in saved coffee money. Eleanor, I said, using my pointer to trace the line on the paper, you are a master saver. You saved $78,000 on coffee and convenience over your working life. That's incredible discipline. Her face brightened for a fleeting moment, a spark of the pride she usually carried. But that exact same money, the $78,000 you meticulously saved, had been strategically invested in simple, diversified index fund earning the market average of 8% over those 30 years. It would be worth over $480,000 today, tax-deferred growth. The silence that followed was suffocating. John stared at the ceiling fan, rotating slowly. Eleanor looked down at her hands, the hands that had meticulously clipped thousands of coupons and counted every single dollar. You won the battle for the $5 latte, I whispered, but you lost the war for the $400,000 in investment growth. This is a central, bitter truth. Folks, you cannot clip coupons your way to a wealthy retirement. Frugality is a necessary, wonderful defense, but compounding growth is your only effective offense against the systemic enemy called inflation and the natural increase of human longevity. As Charlie Munger, the great business mind, famously taught us, the first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. John and Eleanor not only interrupted it, they refused to start in the first place, convinced that fear was a more profitable strategy than educated, long-term risk. But the true conflict, the crushing blow that finally brought them to their knees, was a healthcare crisis. This is where the lack of offensive planning delivered its final, cruel consequence. Eleanor fell last month, John said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, just a bad slip on the garage step. She fractured her hip and tore her medial collateral ligament. Eleanor winced, her leg still in a rigid brace. The surgery was fine, Grandpa. The doctors were wonderful, but the rehabilitation. She explained that she needed 3 months of intensive in-home physical therapy, followed by an additional 4 months in a skilled nursing facility before she could be safely mobile on her own. They had their Medicare Part A hospital and Part B medical services, and they had dutifully chosen a simple, comprehensive Medicare Supplement Plan F, thinking it covered every imaginable expense. We thought we were covered, John said, slapping his hand on the mahogany table. We read the brochure. We had the best Medigap plan. We did the research. I had to deliver the crushing news, the lesson I've given 100 times about Medicare's most painful blind spots, the custodial gap. John, Eleanor, you were covered for the acute care, the surgery, and the hospital stay. That was Part A and the supplement. But Medicare is not designed to pay for long-term custodial care or extended, non-acute home health services. The skilled nursing facility, SNF benefit, has a strict 100-day limit. After day 100, you pay 100% of costs. The skilled nursing facility was charging a staggering $12,000 a month. Their estimated total out-of-pocket for the custodial stay alone was going to be $75,000. $75,000, Eleanor whispered, the number echoing around the room. But we don't have that kind of money just sitting there. We are savers. Their $400,000 nest egg was, at this point, closer to $390,000 after an expensive new roof expense a few months prior. Taking out $75,000 would drop them to $315,000. Given their lack of investment growth and the fact that they were already pulling $10,000 a year from that principal to cover their now inflated lifestyle, they would deplete their savings entirely in about 20 years. John was 66. That was not a safe margin. That was a certainty of financial disaster. They had saved diligently to avoid the $5 cost, but they had failed to plan offensively for the $75,000 cost. They were about to discover the most painful lesson of retirement finance. You must treat the biggest risks with the biggest defense insurance, and the biggest growth opportunities with the biggest offense equities. They did the exact catastrophic opposite. The realization of their predicament was not a sudden burst of anger, but a slow, agonizing slide into despair. They sat there for a long time, the silence broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. They tried to rationalize and delay. John wanted to take a part-time job, but his old logistics company had streamlined operations and replaced his old position with a young man and a sophisticated AI inventory system. Eleanor tried to teach private lessons online, but the hip pain and the constant physical therapy made sitting for long periods unbearable. They had no easy source of new income. The house, John finally said, his voice ragged, breaking the silence. I knew he was going there. The house was their fortress, their symbol of financial victory. It was worth about $350,000, paid off, and the one thing they thought was beyond the market's reach. We can take out a reverse mortgage, John suggested, clinging to hope like a life raft. That way we stay here. We get the money, but we don't have to sell. You could, I agreed, but a reverse mortgage, while a good tool for some, is an expense. It has fees, mortgage insurance, and the interest accrues over time, eat away at your equity. If you use it for a sudden, one-time $75,000 expense, you're using a cannon to kill a mouse and crippling your future estate. I looked at their overall picture. The guaranteed income of $4,200 was stable, but not enough to meet their real spending. Their savings were defensive, but shrinking due to inflation and impending medical bills. Their largest, untapped asset was a house. John, Eleanor, I said, looking them both straight in the eye, connecting with the human beings across the desk, not just the numbers. You played defense for 40 years to secure that house. Now, to truly save your retirement, you have to be offensive about your living situation. You have to trade the emotional cost for financial security. I explained the plan, one that felt like pulling teeth for them, but which was the only mathematically sound way forward. Sell the family home. The $350,000 fortress they had worked so hard to pay off. Purchase a smaller, less expensive home or condo near their daughter in a lower tax state for around $150,000. This move alone would significantly cut their property tax and insurance burdens. Use the resulting $200,000 difference minus selling fees to pay Eleanor's $75,000 medical bill immediately, eliminating the immediate crisis. Invest the remaining $125,000 into a conservatively balanced portfolio, 50% stocks, 50% bonds, for proper inflation-beating growth. This was the ultimate pivot, trading the emotional comfort of the old, expensive-to-maintain fortress for the financial stability of a cash flow positive future. It was the only offensive move left that could salvage their retirement. John slowly pushed the binder away, finally accepting the failure of his old rules. "The house was supposed to be our inheritance," he muttered, his eyes wet. "The security we passed down." "It is your inheritance, John," I corrected him firmly but gently. "It's inheriting a secure retirement. That's worth more than the brick and mortar. You are giving yourself the gift of never having to worry about money again." Eleanor, the master saver, finally understood the true, crushing cost of her savings-only mindset. She looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes. "Grandpa, we were trying to be responsible. We really were. We thought we were doing it right." John and Eleanor sold their house 6 months later. It was a wrenching process, filled with hard decisions about what to keep and what to discard. The family gathered for one final Christmas in the old living room, and John gave a tearful toast about the power of new beginnings, trying to find dignity in the loss. They moved to a small, bright, 2-bedroom condo near their daughter in coastal North Carolina. The cost of living was lower. The taxes were negligible. Their financial life, though emotionally painful to achieve, was now structurally sound. The immediate debt was gone. Eleanor's $75,000 medical bill was paid, and the collection notices stopped coming. Their fixed costs were manageable. The small condo's HOA fee and taxes were less than half of their old property tax bill in Ohio. Their portfolio had offensive power. The $125,000, now invested in a conservatively growth-oriented, diversified fund, was earning 6% a year on average, giving them $7,500 in annual growth, money they could eventually pull from, instead of the paltry $1,250 they were getting from their low-interest CDs. They now had a real financial cushion, not just a defensive wall of cash that was crumbling due to inflation. They had money working for them, playing offense, just like the great financial thinker Ray Dalio advocates for when he talks about the importance of radical diversification and finding assets that will protect you from unexpected systemic shocks like medical inflation. But the story of John and Eleanor is not a complete success. It's a lesson paid for the highest price: their emotional attachment to a lifetime of labor. They should have done this 20 years ago. If that initial $400,000 they had 5 years ago had been invested properly, they could have paid the $75,000 medical bill, kept the house, and still had a growing portfolio. The consequence was a loss of control and a forced, painful liquidation of their most sentimental asset because they allowed an invisible script, the fear of the market, to dictate their retirement strategy. They were forced to sell the house because they were so afraid of a 10% market downturn that they accepted a guaranteed 100% loss of purchasing power over time due to inflation and lack of planning. John and Eleanor are doing fine now. They travel occasionally to see the grandkids, and they finally buy a nice cup of coffee once a week, guilt-free. But their story is a ghost that haunts my office, and it is the single greatest lesson I can give anyone approaching retirement. The old money rules, the ones about saving every penny, avoiding debt, and keep your cash under mattress, are wonderful for defense when you are young and building your foundation. But they are a recipe for financial disaster in the retirement landscape of today, where life expectancy is longer and costs are skyrocketing. You must stop playing defense 24/7. You need to focus on the big, offensive wins. 1. The fatal error: savings is not investing. The biggest mistake John and Eleanor made was believing that saving money in low-interest accounts was the same as investing it. It's not. Let me be clear. Saving is for cash you need in the next 1 to 5 years. That's your emergency fund or money for a planned major purchase. This money should be safe and liquid. Investing is for cash you need 5 years from now and beyond. This is your retirement money. If you are 60 and plan to live until 90, you have a 30-year time horizon. Your portfolio needs to keep growing for the first 15 years of retirement to combat inflation. You need to stay on offense. That means having a portion of your money, even in retirement, in diversified equities. 2. The biggest offensive plays you cannot ignore. Forget the defensive distraction of clipping coupons. Here are the true offensive actions that save or cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars in retirement. First, stop focusing on $5 expenses and start maximizing your Social Security. The defensive distraction is thinking that a tiny cut in your spending is enough. The true offensive action is optimizing your Social Security filing strategy. This is the bedrock of your retirement income, and failing to file correctly can cost a couple over $100,000 in lifetime benefits. You must use an online calculator or talk to an advisor to determine your and your spouse's maximum benefit, especially coordinating spousal benefits. That is where the real money is, not in the grocery aisle. Second, stop worrying about market risk and start managing healthcare risk. The defensive distraction is keeping all your cash out of the stock market because you fear a 10% downturn. The true offensive action is mastering your healthcare costs and filling the Medicare gaps. Medicare is not enough. You must plan aggressively for deductibles, copays, and, most importantly, long-term care or LTC. A comprehensive look at LTC insurance or building a dedicated self-insurance fund is crucial. That was John and Eleanor's $75,000 blind spot. Third, stop keeping all your cash in CDs and start demanding growth. The defensive distraction is believing CDs and savings accounts protect you. They don't. They guarantee you lose money to inflation. The true offensive action is maintaining a growth portfolio even in retirement. You need an inflation hedge. A 50% stocks and 50% bonds allocation for money you won't touch for 5 to 10 years is necessary. This is your offensive front line, guaranteeing your portfolio lives longer than you do. Fourth, stop scrimping on small things and start winning the tax war. The defensive distraction is focusing on a $50 tax deduction. The true offensive action is tax optimization. This is the easiest win. Are your assets in the right buckets? Are you intelligently performing small Roth conversions during low-income years to lower your total tax bill later when Social Security kicks in? Taxes are often the largest single expense in retirement, and planning your withdrawals defensively and offensively is absolutely essential. A rich life in retirement isn't about being forced to sell your home. It's about having the financial confidence, the offensive power, to live your life on your own terms. My final piece of advice, my friends, is this: be disciplined, be frugal, and be defensive in your early years. But for God's sake, as you approach retirement, you must move to the offense. Learn the big rules. Master the big risks. Don't let the small victory of avoiding a $5 latte blind you to the catastrophic loss of secure, comfortable, and independent retirement. Your future depends on playing big. That's the hard truth, folks. If this story gave you the insight you needed, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any of my lessons. Now, don't wait to play offense. Click on one of the videos you see on screen. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Grandpa's Curveball.